In the lobby afterward, people lingered, sharing stories and making plans. Officers from different cities exchanged contact information, eager to support each other's programs. Young people clustered around the senator's children, asking how to start chapters in their own communities. Community leaders compared notes on what worked best in their neighborhoods. The senator watched it all with quiet satisfaction, remembering that terrible afternoon a year ago. His children's frightening experience had sparked something powerful, not just a program or a policy, but a movement based on a simple truth. When people take the time to know each other as human beings, real change becomes possible. As they left the ceremony, carrying their award but knowing the real prize was the change they'd helped create, the family stopped to talk with some of the officers and community members they'd first met at those early dinner gatherings. They weren't strangers anymore, or even just program participants. They had become something more, proof that even the darkest moments can lead to light if we're brave enough to build bridges instead of barriers. 1 year after that fateful afternoon traffic stop, the state senator stood on a national stage, his children beside him. The hall was packed with people from across the country, police officers, community leaders, young activists, and families. They weren't there to remember a tragedy. They were there to celebrate a transformation. The award ceremony wasn't just about recognizing one family's response to injustice. It was about honoring the thousands of people who had taken a painful moment and turned it into a movement for positive change. The older child, now a college freshman studying public policy, looked out at the crowd with quiet pride. The younger one, about to graduate high school, held a thick folder containing stories from communities across the nation. A year ago, the senator began, his voice carrying across the hushed room, "My children experienced something no one should ever have to face." They could have responded with anger. We could have responded with lawsuits. Instead, they showed us a better way. The screens behind him showed images from the past year, community dinners where officers and families shared meals and stories, youth sports leagues where police coaches celebrated their players' victories, graduation ceremonies where officers cheered for teens they'd mentored, community garden harvests where everyone worked side by side. In the audience sat the officers from the original incident. They weren't hiding in shame. They were there as proud supporters of the program they'd helped build. One of them had just been promoted to lead his department's community engagement division. Another was developing training programs for new officers, using his own experience to teach others about the importance of seeing beyond assumptions. The senator's children shared their own reflections. The older one spoke about starting a chapter of the program at their college, bringing together campus police and students for monthly dialogue sessions. The younger one talked about the Youth Leadership Council they'd established, which had now spread to 50 other cities. But the most powerful moments came from others sharing their stories. A teenager from Detroit described how the program had changed her view of police officers. "Now when I see an officer, I might recognize them from our community basketball league or remember them from a dinner at my grandmother's house. They're not just uniforms anymore, they're people I know." A veteran officer from Texas stood up to share how the program had transformed his approach to his job. "I've been on the force for 20 years, and I thought I knew everything about policing. This program taught me that real strength comes from building connections, not just enforcing laws." The statistics were impressive. Dozens of cities had adopted the program, thousands of officers had gone through the training, and complaints about police conduct had dropped dramatically in participating communities. But the real success stories were in the small moments. The officer who attended a student's art show because they'd bonded over painting at a community event. The teenager who called an officer for advice about college applications. The family who invited their police friends to their holiday celebration. Local businesses that had supported the program reported unexpected benefits. Crime rates had dropped, yes, but more importantly, community spirit had soared. Shops that hosted program events saw more customers. Parks that held community activities were better maintained. Neighborhoods felt more connected, safer, more like real communities. The senator spoke about the legislation that had grown from the program, new laws requiring community engagement training for officers, funding for youth police partnership programs, support for community-based policing initiatives. But he emphasized that the real change wasn't in the laws or the policies. "Real change," he said, looking at his children with pride, "happens when we choose to see each other as human beings first. When we respond to fear with understanding, to anger with grace, to division with connection. As the ceremony ended, something unexpected happened. The audience, officers, community members, young and old, from all backgrounds, stood together, applauding not just the award recipients but the possibility they represented. The standing ovation wasn't just for the senator's family or the program they'd created. It was for the idea that even our most challenging moments can lead to positive change if we face them with courage, grace, and a willingness to build bridges instead of walls. Other cities began adapting the program to their own needs. In urban areas, they'd focused on youth entrepreneurship programs co-mentored by officers and business leaders. Rural communities created agricultural projects where officers and local families worked together in community gardens. Each place made the program their own while keeping the core idea: building real, human connections. The officers involved in the original incident became some of the most compelling speakers for the program. They traveled to other departments, sharing their story with brutal honesty. "We made mistakes that day," they would say. "But look at what those mistakes led to. Look at how we all grew from it." Universities began studying the program's impact. Researchers documented how simple actions, sharing meals, playing sports, working on community projects together, could create lasting change in police-community relations. The program was proving that real transformation doesn't always require complex solutions. Sometimes it just needs people willing to see each other as human beings first. Word spread fast in the age of social media. What started in one suburban neighborhood began catching fire across the country. It started with a simple video. Someone had recorded one of the community dinner events, showing officers and local teens cooking together, laughing over burnt cookies, and sharing stories about their lives. The video went viral not because of conflict or controversy, but because of its simple humanity. National news picked up the story, sending reporters to cover what they thought would be a quick feel-good piece. Instead, they'd found something deeper. They saw real change happening in real time. The reporter from a major network arrived expecting to spend one day. She stayed for a week, moved by the authenticity of what she witnessed. The senator's older child, now a senior preparing for college, spoke to the cameras with remarkable poise. "What happened to us that day was scary," they said, stirring a pot of chili at a community dinner. "But look around this room now. These officers aren't just police to us anymore. Their coach Mike, who helps with baseball practice, their officer Anne, who tutors math after her shift, they're real people who've become part of our community." Police departments from other cities started sending representatives to observe. They came with notepads and skeptical expressions, but left with something more valuable: hope. They saw how simple ideas, like sharing meals and coaching youth sports, could break down walls that seemed impossible to scale. A police chief from a large city on the West Coast spent 3 days watching the program in action. On his last day, he sat in on a youth advisory council meeting. The senator's younger child was leading a discussion about how to improve first encounters between officers and teenagers. The chief watched as young people and officers talked openly about their fears, their assumptions, and their hopes for better understanding. "In 30 years of law enforcement," the chief later said in an interview, "I've never seen anything like this. These kids aren't just participating in a program, they're helping to reshape how we think about community policing." The transformation wasn't just happening in organized events. Officers who had gone through the program reported handling tense situations differently. One officer shared how he'd approached a group of teenagers playing basketball after hours in a school parking lot. In the past, he might have led with authority and suspicion. Instead, he recognized one of the teens from a community dinner and joined their game for a few minutes before gently explaining why they needed to wrap it up. The program's success caught the attention of police academies. Training modules developed through the initiative began being incorporated into standard police education. New officers weren't just learning about law enforcement, they were learning about community engagement, about seeing the humanity in every interaction. Local businesses that had supported the program reported unexpected benefits. The coffee shop that hosted Coffee with a Cup mornings saw increased community engagement. The grocery store that donated snacks found that shoplifting incidents dropped as teens and officers built better relationships. The community library became a hub for dialogue and understanding. The statistics told a powerful story. In areas where the program was fully implemented, complaints against officers dropped by 60%. More importantly, positive interactions increased dramatically. Officers reported higher job satisfaction. Community members reported feeling safer and more connected to their local police. But the real stories of transformation were more personal. A teenager who had once run from police officers was now leading workshops about youth police communication. An officer known for being tough and distant was coaching a youth basketball team. The grandmother who had shared baseball pictures at the first dinner was now organizing monthly community potlucks. The senator's children, now preparing for college and high school graduation respectively, had become powerful advocates for change. They traveled to other cities to help launch similar programs, sharing their story not as victims, but as catalysts for positive transformation. Their experience had sparked a movement, but their grace in handling it inspired others to turn their own challenging moments into opportunities for growth. Social media played a huge role in spreading the impact. Short videos of program activities went viral, officers and teens cooking together, community sports games, candid moments of real connection. These weren't staged photo ops, they were genuine glimpses of communities coming together. Local businesses got involved too. The coffee shop near the high school started hosting Coffee with a Cop mornings, where students could stop by and chat with officers in a casual setting. The local grocery store donated snacks for youth program events. The community library created a special section for books about civil rights and community policing, with reading groups that brought officers and residents together for discussions. 6 months into the program, the data started showing remarkable changes. Complaints about police conduct dropped significantly. More importantly, positive interactions increased. Officers who went through the program reported feeling more connected to the community, more aware of their own biases, and better equipped to handle tense situations. But the real success stories weren't in the statistics, they were in the small moments. An officer recognizing a teen from their dinner group and stopping to ask about their upcoming test. A family inviting their officer friend to their child's graduation party. Young people feeling comfortable enough to wave hello to patrol cars instead of avoiding eye contact. The program wasn't solving every problem overnight, but it was building something crucial: trust, understanding, and human connections. It was proving that when people take the time to see each other as individuals, to share meals and stories and experiences, real change becomes possible. The Bridge the Gap initiative started small, in the community center's old gymnasium. The first meeting brought together 30 police officers and 20 families, all sitting awkwardly at round tables, the smell of potluck dishes filling the air. The senator's children stood by the entrance, welcoming everyone with name tags and warm smiles, though some could still see the lingering nervousness in their eyes. Nobody quite knew what to expect. The officers had come in their civilian clothes, as requested, but you could still spot them easily. They sat with straight backs, alert eyes scanning the room from habit. The families were just as unsure, some parents keeping their children close, others trying too hard to make small talk. Then something beautiful happened over plates of homemade lasagna and sweet potato pie. A young officer mentioned coaching Little League baseball. The grandmother at his table lit up. Her grandson played baseball too. She pulled out her phone to show pictures, and suddenly they weren't a police officer and a community member anymore. They were just two people who loved baseball. At another table, one of the senator's children shared their story about the traffic stop. But instead of pointing fingers, they asked the officers at their table, "What could we have done differently? What would have made you feel safer?" The officers, moved by this approach, opened up about their own fears and uncertainties on the job. Real dialogue began to flow. The program grew from there, expanding in ways nobody had expected. Local restaurants started donating meals for the monthly gatherings. Community centers offered their spaces. What started as awkward dinners became cooking classes where officers and teens made meals together, weekend sports tournaments, and community garden projects. The senator's children, showing incredible strength, became the program's youth ambassadors. They visited high schools to help other young people understand their rights, while also teaching them how to handle difficult situations with dignity. They worked with young police cadets, sharing their experience not to shame, but to educate. One particularly powerful moment came during a training session 3 months into the program. The officers who had been involved in the original incident asked to speak to the whole group. The room fell silent as they stood up, their faces showing the weight of what they wanted to say. "We made assumptions that day," the senior officer said, his voice thick with emotion. "We saw what we expected to see, not what was actually there. We didn't see two honor students heading home from school. We didn't see young people who volunteer in their community. We didn't see someone's children. And that's on us." Instead of leaving it at an apology, these officers became some of the program's strongest advocates. They joined the training team, using their experience to help other officers recognize and overcome their biases. Their honesty about their mistakes made their message even more powerful. The program developed different tracks to address various needs. There were youth leadership workshops where teens and officers worked together on community projects. Family dinner nights became a monthly tradition, with hosting duties rotating between police families and community families. Sports leagues formed where officers and local kids played on mixed teams. One of the most successful elements was the Walk With Me program, where officers would spend a day shadowing community members in their daily lives. They'd help stock shelves at local businesses, assist at daycare centers, join community cleanup efforts. In return, carefully selected community members would ride along with officers, seeing the challenges of their job firsthand. The changes weren't just in organized events. Officers who participated in the program started stopping by the local basketball courts to shoot hoops with the kids. They'd wave at families they knew from dinner events, stop to chat at local shops, become real people in the community rather than just uniforms passing through. The senators' children watched their painful experience transform into something powerful. Their younger siblings started a youth advisory council, bringing together teens from all parts of the community to discuss their experiences with law enforcement and suggest improvements. The older one developed a training module about communication during traffic stops, which became part of the standard police academy curriculum. What could have been a meeting about punishment became a session about transformation. They worked through lunch, ordering sandwiches as they hammered out details. By afternoon, they had more than just a plan. They had a commitment from every person in the room to make it work. When the senator finally returned home that evening, his children were surprised by his smile. They had expected anger, demands for justice, a father's righteous outrage. Instead, he gathered them in the living room and shared his vision. "Sometimes," he told them, "the best response to darkness is to build something that brings light. What happened to you was wrong, but we're going to use it to make sure it happens less often to others. And I'm going to need your help." His children, still processing their own experience, listened as he explained the program. Their faces brightened as they realized they could be part of the solution. The same dignity they'd shown during their ordeal could now help create lasting change. That night, after making sure his children were safely home and finally sleeping, the state senator sat in his home office, tie loosened, jacket thrown over a chair. The events of the afternoon kept playing through his mind like a movie he couldn't stop. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten on the desk as he stared at the family photos on his wall, pictures of happier times, of graduations and award ceremonies, of proud moments that felt a world away from today's events. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing. News of the incident had spread like wildfire. Civil rights attorneys were calling, offering to take the case pro bono. Local news stations wanted statements. Social media was already exploding with the video clips neighbors had recorded. His inbox was flooding with emails from angry constituents demanding justice. The easy path was clear: file a lawsuit, make a public spectacle, demand resignations. His political advisors were already drafting strongly worded statements condemning the police department. But as he sat there, looking at a photo of his children volunteering at last year's community fair, a different idea began to take shape. He thought about the young officers who had searched his children. Their faces had shown not just authority but fear. Fear that came from not knowing the community they were supposed to protect. Fear that led to poor decisions, to seeing threats where there were only teenagers heading home from school. He thought about his own children, how they'd maintained their dignity even when faced with unfair treatment. They hadn't responded with anger, so why should he? At midnight, he started making calls, not to lawyers or reporters, but to people he knew could make real change happen. The police chief, who he'd worked with on community initiatives before. The mayor, who had been pushing for reform but needed public support. Community leaders who had been advocating for better police-community relations for years. "We need to meet," he told each of them. "Not next week, not tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow morning first thing. What happened today can't happen to anyone else's children." The morning meeting was tense at first. They gathered in the mayor's office, the senator, still wearing yesterday's suit, the police chief, looking like he hadn't slept, community leaders with decades of experience, and the mayor, nervous but hopeful. The senator had brought something unexpected, not complaints or demands, but a proposal. "We can turn this into a moment of transformation," he said, pulling out a draft plan he'd worked on all night. "Instead of pointing fingers, let's build bridges. Instead of lawsuits, let's create understanding." He laid out his vision. A comprehensive program that would pair officers with local families for regular meals and community events. Not just quick meet and greets, but real relationships built over time. Officers would spend time in the communities they served, not just driving through them. They would learn the stories of the people they were meant to protect. "My children spent yesterday afternoon being treated like criminals," he said, his voice firm but without anger. "But they also spent last weekend tutoring kids at the library. They organize food drives, they help elderly neighbors with yard work, they're part of this community." How many officers knew that before yesterday? How many officers know similar stories about the young people they encounter every day? The police chief, who had come prepared for confrontation, found himself nodding. The mayor leaned forward, interested. Community leaders who had expected another round of empty promises saw something different, a practical path forward. The senator described how the program would work: monthly dinners where officers would be guests in community members' homes. Youth programs where teens and police could interact in positive settings. Training sessions led by community members themselves, sharing their experiences and perspectives. "We're not just going to talk about change," he explained, pulling out detailed plans. "We're going to make it happen, step by step, meal by meal, conversation by conversation." As he spoke, the tension in the room began to shift. The police chief offered suggestions about officer scheduling and training integration. Community leaders proposed ways to get local businesses involved. The mayor, seeing the possibility of real progress, promised to fast-track funding. Standing there on that suburban street, holding his trembling children close, the senator felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just another incident to be addressed with legislation or committee meetings. This was personal, visceral, real. As he looked around at the gathered neighbors, the still flashing police lights, the officers now awkwardly avoiding eye contact, he knew this moment would lead to something bigger than all of them. His driver had already started picking up the scattered school supplies, carefully salvaging what he could of the chemistry test and debate notes. Neighbors stepped forward too, offering words of support, helping to gather the strewn papers. In that moment of community solidarity, even as his heart still raced with parental concern, the senator began forming a plan, one that would transform this painful incident into something powerful and positive. The state capitol building stood tall and imposing against the afternoon sky, its marble columns gleaming in the sunlight. Inside, the state senator was deep in discussion about an education funding bill, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed the latest amendments. 20 years of public service had taught him to stay focused during these long legislative sessions, but nothing in those years had prepared him for the call he was about to receive. His phone buzzed quietly in his pocket, once, twice, 3 times. He normally never checked messages during sessions, but something made him glance down. His youngest child's name flashed on the screen, along with a text that made his heart stop. "Dad, police have us surrounded. We didn't do anything wrong. Please help." The change in his expression was immediate. His colleagues noticed. You don't serve alongside someone for years without learning to read their face. He stood up so quickly his chair nearly toppled backward, papers scattering across the polished wooden desk. "Family emergency," he managed to say, his voice tight with controlled panic. The session chair merely nodded. They'd all seen the news lately. They'd all understood what could be at stake. He ran through the Capitol's marble halls, his dress shoes echoing off the walls. The security guards, who usually insisted on proper protocols, took one look at his face and quickly opened the doors. His driver was already waiting. Bless that man's instincts, with the car running. During the drive, which felt like the longest 15 minutes of his life, the senator's mind raced through every possibility. His children were good kids, straight-A students, active in community service, the kind of teenagers who spent their free time tutoring younger students and helping at food banks. But he also knew from both personal experience and his years working on police reform legislation that none of that might matter. He loosened his tie as they drove, his hand shaking slightly as he tried calling both kids. No answer. He called his wife, who was out of town at a medical conference. Unhandling it, he assured her, trying to keep his voice steady. "Stay focused on your presentation. I'll call you as soon as I know more." But they both knew she wouldn't be able to think about anything else now. Their neighborhood came into view. The same streets where his children had learned to ride bikes, where they'd held block parties and community gatherings. Now there were police cars parked at odd angles, their lights still flashing. Neighbors stood on their porches and lawns, some recording with their phones, others looking on with concern. These were the same neighbors who'd watched his kids grow up, who'd attended their birthday parties, who knew them as the teenagers who always offered to help carry groceries or shovel snow. The car had barely stopped when he jumped out, his suit jacket flapping in the breeze. The scene before him made his blood run cold, his children, still in their school uniforms, standing on the sidewalk surrounded by officers. Their school papers and books lay scattered on the ground, their carefully maintained Honda subjected to a thorough search. He'd prepared for moments like this throughout his political career. He'd worked on legislation, attended community meetings, pushed for reforms. But nothing could have prepared him for seeing his own children facing this situation. His son's debate team jacket lay in the dirt. His daughter's perfect chemistry test had been trampled underfoot. The officers didn't recognize him at first. Why would they? Right now, he wasn't a state senator in a tailored suit. He was just another worried father rushing to his children's aid. He approached slowly, hands visible, using every ounce of his self-control to remain calm. He taught his children how to handle situations like this, and now he had to model that same composure. "Those are my children," he said, his voice carrying the weight of both parental authority and decades of public service. "I'm state senator." But before he could finish, a senior officer arriving on the scene recognized him. The change in atmosphere was immediate and palpable. The same officers who moments ago had been aggressively searching his children's car now stood uncertain, their earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew. The senior officer quickly took control of the situation, ordering the search to stop. But the damage was already done, not just to scattered school books and trampled test papers, but to something deeper, more fundamental. The autumn afternoon started like any other in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Pine Grove. The state senator's children were driving home from their high school, where they'd stayed late for their usual activities, the older sibling for debate club practice, and the younger for advanced placement study group. Their silver Honda Civic, a 16th birthday present chosen specifically for its safety features, cruised smoothly along the tree-lined streets they'd known all their lives. The siblings were discussing their day, with the older one proud about winning a mock debate on environmental policy, while the younger one was excited about acing their chemistry test. The car's radio played softly in the background, and the fallen leaves danced around their car as they drove. It was just another normal day in their lives as honor roll students, until it wasn't. The flash of red and blue lights in their rearview mirror came as a complete surprise. The older sibling, who was driving, immediately remembered their parents' careful instructions for moments like these. They slowly pulled over to the right, turned off the engine, and placed both hands visible on the steering wheel. Their younger sibling also kept their hands visible on their lap, just as they'd been taught. 2 police officers approached the car, one on each side, with their hands already on their weapons. The tension in the air was immediate and heavy. "Step out of the vehicle," the first officer commanded, his voice sharp and stern. The siblings exchanged a quick glance, their hearts pounding but their movements deliberate and calm. As they carefully stepped out into the cool afternoon air, more police cars arrived, their sirens silent but lights flashing, drawing the attention of neighbors who began to peer out their windows. The children found themselves surrounded by 4 officers now, all with stern expressions and rigid postures. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area," one officer announced, though he provided no specifics. Despite the siblings' polite attempts to explain, they were simply heading home from school, still wearing their school uniforms and carrying their backpacks full of books. The officers proceeded with an aggressive search of their vehicle. The younger sibling, fighting back tears, watched as their carefully organized chemistry notes scattered across the seat. The older one stood perfectly still, mentally repeating their father's words: "Stay calm, be respectful, remember who you are." Their school debate team jacket, with its collection of winning pins, lay crumpled on the ground where an officer had tossed it after inspection. Neighbors gathered on their porches, some recording with their phones, others whispering among themselves. A few recognized the children. After all, everyone knew the state senator's kids. They were the ones who helped organize the community food drive last Thanksgiving, who tutored younger children at the library on weekends, who always smiled and waved as they passed by. The search continued for what felt like hours, but was probably 20 minutes. The officers rifled through their backpacks, questioned them repeatedly about their activities, and scrutinized their student IDs with suspicious eyes. All this while, the siblings maintained their composure, answering each question clearly and politely, even as their voices trembled slightly. Finally, with shaking hands but determined spirit, the younger sibling managed to reach for their phone. While one officer barked at them to put it down, they quickly pressed their father's contact number. They knew he was in an important legislative session, but they also knew this was exactly the kind of situation he had prepared them for. Through all of this, the most remarkable thing wasn't the officer's behavior or the growing crowd of onlookers, it was the dignity with which these teenage siblings handled themselves. They stood straight, spoke clearly, and maintained their composure, even as their regular afternoon turned into a moment that would soon spark national attention. The autumn breeze continued to blow leaves across the street, the afternoon sun continued to shine, and somewhere in the distance, a school bus full of children drove past. It was a scene that would become emblematic of both the challenges and the potential for change in their community, though none of the people present knew it yet. For now, it was simply a moment of injustice being faced with extraordinary grace by two young people who had been taught well by their parents about both their rights and their responsibilities.